Brad, I'm so excited to talk about this month's topic because we're constantly working with people who they want to achieve different things. They want to create great results, but they feel lost in terms of, what they should be doing. And we often talk about consistency is key, congruency is key. Um, we've got some great stories around some of the things we've been talking about with clients this month. Like, what's coming to mind for you?
Yeah, I think it's also that time of the year, right? So we're well and truly into the new year now, and it's like that New Year's Eve, New Year's resolutions are sort of either failing or rounding off or dropping off, or you're actually sort of doubled down and really focused on it. I had a conversation with one client who's doing like a 75-day challenge. All right, so it's a combination of food and diet and that sort of stuff, which is good, and that's to get going. But his presenting problem was how do I get going and keep motivated. I had a great year last year. Everything was really successful, and I want to sort of double down on that. But it's like, how do I move on to that level of getting through there? And I said, well, let's start with the end in mind. Where do you want to be in 12 months' time? Let's work backwards for that. And what is the emotional drive that you're going to have? Not the KPIs, not the budgets, that's the stuff. It's all good, right? It's all great, but what's the emotional drive that you're going to get that's going to be passionate, that's going to drive your team so that you can sort of go through and do that? And it was quite interesting because he hadn't really thought about that. And I gave a couple of stories about people I've worked with who have had a goal or a stretch goal, or the team will do a thing, or they'll achieve this. Or one guy went and bought a really, really expensive bottle of whiskey when he hit a milestone, sort of thing. And that was not that I condone that kind of behavior, but that was his reward for this outcome and the emotional investment of that. Another guy went and bought a client went and bought a really, really nice car. And every time he sat in that car, it reminded him of the effort he'd put in to get there, which allowed him to sort of keep going there. So I think that's start that in mind. And what's the emotional drive that's going to get you there? And how can you actually have that's like really a good drive for you? So when you talk about it with your team, it's going to come across as passion. It's going to come across as something that, yeah, let's get behind this guy. He's taking us where we want to go.
That's making me think back to our days, when we are doing lots of hypnosis and practitioner and NLP trainings. And as you know, all of our coaches at Life Puzzle are master trainers of NLP and hypnosis. And we often get that curiosity around, oh, can you hypnotize me, make me do this thing? And I remember years ago, I was doing a smoking cessation with a lady who wanted to quit smoking, obviously. And that habit of actually going and buying cigarettes was a thing that she really struggled with. And so I think I actually got the idea from you many years ago that, like, rather than going to the shop to go and buy the cigarettes, she had to go and deposit the money that she would have spent on the cigarettes to the bank account that was specifically for her celebration day of the amount of months that she wanted to have been a smoking free person. And it was so interesting. Her goal was to buy Jimmy Choo shoes with what was in that account. So I think meaningfulness in terms of creating your goals and your habits is a really important point, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, we often see these people where people think that setting a financial goal and money in the bank or a budget thing is what's going to get them there. And it is important to have that as an outcome. But that in itself doesn't really give you the emotional drive, the benefit of it there. Yeah. And again, that task, putting money in the bank account, is a little bit hard these days. There's not as many banks as there used to
That's
be
so
that take
true.
cash deposit.
Well, even like manually transferring the transaction could
Doesn't work. It doesn't work. No, it's got to be a physical transfer. The
gotta be
physical activity of doing it. Yeah, that
yeah.
was a task, but it doesn't necessarily work anymore now because we don't have as many banks as we do have people who sell cigarettes.
And I think that's, in all seriousness, I think that this conversation is really important in the concept of, the keystone of what habits represent. I was doing a live earlier today and talking about the importance of congruency around the three minds. So we've got the conscious mind, the unconscious mind, and the critical faculty. And often when people are setting out to make change, whether it's a personal goal, a career goal, as a financial goal, something to do with friends and family or relationships, I think sometimes people don't even know what they want, which you alluded to before. If they do know what they want, then they often don't have that connection to, what does this mean for me? And what are the emotions that I'll get as a result of achieving this? We're often discussing with people how they think they should do certain things, oh, I should do this. And they end up shooting all over themselves. What do you think the impact of that is for a lot of people that perhaps don't know what we know?
Yeah, I think that shooting all over yourself is a good example where you're saying things you think that other people other people want them to do as opposed to what their drive is in there. I think that's a factor, and I think also it's really about getting into the fact that back onto that emotional drive, but then really going down. So we talk about, in the context of SMART goals, we talk about access, the ecology of it, and in all areas of life. So you've got to think about, okay, if I hit this goal in the context of business, what's the effect of this in other areas of my life? So therefore, what we're doing is we're making sure that the goals we set in a context, or the outcome we set in a context, is having a positive effect in other areas. So there's not going to be any conflict. The classic one where you might have a business owner who's got a really, really big financial goal, and at the detriment of their health and their family, their relationships, that takes precedent over everything else, and they achieve that goal. Fantastic. And they look behind them and there's a trail of destruction of them achieving that outcome. So I think getting clear on what you actually want in that is, as we talked about, that emotional drive, and then thinking about what are the steps that you need to go through to do that, and getting some critical thinking around what are the effects of this achieving on other areas of my life? How do I get that balance? All right. Because if you're just striving for one particular thing at the cost of all others, you're probably going to lose that motivation, because it's become hard. It's going to become a chore. And then all of a sudden it drops off because there's other shiny things to go through and look at and do, which is more important.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that we talk about in our what we talked about in our habit transformation challenge that we ran just last month, and when we're talking with clients about actually installing change over time, is that Harvard study of the 66 days to form a new habit. And for anyone who's listening, don't think that you can do like 10 days and then have a break and then start the 11th day when you have the break. The study showed that people actually had to do that consistent behavior 66 days in a row, and then at the end of that, the neurology had actually formed so that the person was not trying to exercise a habit, but it was just something that they did. And I think this is really important based on what you just said around the fact that ultimately, if we don't have that congruency, if we don't have that meaningfulness, if we don't have an attachment to why we're doing this for ourselves, then it really does become a chore, right, Brad?
Yeah. Your internet's catchy.
Uh,
Yeah, and so that's 66 days. That's you doing the process consciously, all right? So it's a conscious behavior. So you're consciously efforting at making that change. And we talk about the three minds and how 10% of the 10% is conscious and 80% unconscious. And if we look at how we can go through, and yes, the study is very clear, it works, and then the test is there, is that you've got to do it consistently to be able to build that habit consciously. But imagine what you can do if you can double down. You can do the process consciously, as well as bringing in all those unconscious elements, being the memories from the past, your values, your emotions, the drive, all that sort of stuff, that is requiring less effort. Then it only allows you to sort of knock it out of the park, And when I first saw that study, I used to, and then Shondell used to say, 66 days to change a habit. I said, consciously. Being a hardcore hypnotherapist, you can change behaviors quite quickly at an unconscious level, assuming the willpower is there. I think this is the really important point here with the atomic habits, is that the willpower to do the activity has to be there before the person can do it. It's like someone, we talked about the smokers before, people go, I want to stop smoking. Hypnotize me. Make me become a non-smoker. Yeah, one guy come along and said, "Why are you here?" He said, "My wife bought me this hypnosis session to become a non-smoker." I said, "Do you want to stop smoking?" He said, "No." I said, "You want me to make your wife go away from you?"
And that's the thing, isn't it? Like, people have sometimes unconscious drivers, and it's really interesting how that personal ownership comes into the habits as well, because there's lots of people that very well meaningly want to try and change something because they think they should. There's the shooting on themselves, but more importantly, it's because someone that they care about them has urged them, or has pleaded with them to make some kind of change. We see it all the time with people who might be unhealthily overweight, and their significant others or their children, please, mummy, daddy, and I think you mentioned before the willpower, and I think this is really important because in hypnosis, we say everybody has free will, right? So we can't make anyone do anything that they don't want to do or that they don't want to participate in. And so that desire has to come from within first. Now, maybe truthfully, that person may not have a strategy yet to be able to actualize a change, but they absolutely have to have a desire. And so I know that you've done, I probably can't even count how many hypnotherapy sessions and how many stage shows in hypnosis and different things that are both therapeutic and also, educational / entertaining
Yeah,
around the concept of hypnosis. However, I think it's really important. Do you want to talk a little bit about that today, Brad, for people who perhaps don't really understand the value of how the subconscious mind plays a role in changing habits and behaviors?
Yeah, so I think that willpower, as you mentioned, is important, because if you don't have the choice, you don't want to be able to go through and do that. It's very difficult to sort of go through and do that. And we think about that in the context of sales or leadership. If your team don't have the buy-in to the desire to do it, then they're not going to have they're going to have the willpower to sort of do it based on it's a task and activity. But then that's not necessarily going to map across to being a driving force that they're going to want to be doing it all the time. So you got to think about, in the communication, when you're talking to people, how do you get them on board, and how do you get that buy-in with them wanting to be able to go through and do those tasks and activities? Back to the individual themselves, going through and realizing that there's an element of sabotage that you're going to be doing, and we all do it from time to time. Even myself, from time to time, we'll go through and do that. And you don't wake up in the morning and go, all right, today's Friday, the 15th of February, and today I'm going to sabotage myself. It doesn't sort of come up like that. It's sort of after the effect, you've gone through and you've done it, you realize, why did I do that? And so often it's because that there's other things out of our awareness, our unconscious, subconscious level, that is sort of affecting us there. So when we can get into and we can find out what are those blockages, what are those things that prevent us from being able to be congruent, being clear, being consistent with our outcomes, it makes a really big difference. And I think most importantly, a lot of people are unaware of their unconscious mind because it's unconscious, which makes complete sense. For example, the joke I used to say is, until I mentioned it, you weren't aware of the feeling of your backside in the chair. It was unconscious. Yes. All right. So these things are all happening, but if there's not a level of awareness there, how can you catch it? And if you're not clear on where you want to go, how can you start looking at that, where you're going to sabotage and doing that? So there's a whole world of work to do and understanding that. And it was interesting on that concept of that sabotage. I was having a conversation with a friend the other day, and he was talking to a guy he'd worked with. And he said, this guy is a phenomenal. He's incredibly smart. He said, I've noticed something about him over the period of time. Whenever someone says something negative, or, we talk about below the line, but anytime someone says something negative or can't do that, he is completely immune to the conversation, where it just goes straight over his head and he changes the conversation. And this guy's a super, super successful. Everything he touches, I was told by this, every time he touches, it turns to gold, right? And he finds incredible niches and opportunities in business to be able to find it and turn it around. And I think when in the conversations having with him, and I met the guy briefly, he was 100% very clear on what he wanted. And he did not let any negativity, any naysay, anything that couldn't come into the process into his mind. Everything he said was positive without being flaky, and really interesting. I think that if you can condition yourself the habit of being able to block that negative self-talk, if you can go through the process of creating that above the line and thinking about what you want over that 66 days, that's allowing you to go through and consciously work with that unconscious elements of sabotage and doing that. So I think that's a difficult thing to do. And I think that the people that are successful are ones that always look at what they can do to turn into a positive, what they can do, how they can polish a turd to make it gold, so to speak, as they often say.
I love that. And, from that perspective, I think that there's probably a lot of people that watch that go, well, how do I silence my negativity? Because my itty bitty shitty committee, my negative talk is so loud, how in the world can I stop that, or how can I silence it? And I just want to give a little tip for some people who may be finding this difficult to start with, is that we actually have 4 stages to learning, right, Brad? So we start in a process where we're not even aware. And you mentioned before, creating awareness around things as a starting point. The second thing is we're aware, but we're incompetent in being able to change it. And then we move to a place where we effort to be able to change it. And then we move to a place where it becomes unconsciously patterned in us. And I think that, a lot of people have negative self-talk and they know that they shouldn't, but they don't know what to do about it. So I think reframing is a really important first step to being able to then move to a place where you silence or block out that negativity. I know there's a number of different reframes that we teach. We've got the deframing, we've got the reframing. We look at, looking at different scenarios, context reframes, content reframes, and those are all things that we teach as part of our leadership and sales programs. But from that perspective, like when we talk about the 4 stages to learning, what's your thoughts for someone who might be trying to make this change but doesn't yet have the resources?
Yeah, I think it's getting ahead of it. It's very difficult to, like I said, you realize you sabotage after the effect. So getting very clear on what you want and being in front of the negativity. So what does that mean? Well, we talk about the worry wall. We talk about thinking about 15 minutes after the successful completion of this day, and having people go through and actually think about what is the goal for that day that they're going to do at the start of the day, as soon as they wake up, going through and doing that. So they're starting to condition themselves to have the picture in their head, hopefully some emotional drive to it, maybe the sounds, maybe the taste and smells, depending on what the goal is, going through and making sure that goal at the beginning of the day is what that single focus point is. And if you do that and then you can draw on that, it's going to help you catch that itty bitty shitty community before it goes through. That's one part of it. The other thing is about really becoming conscious of it and catching it. So we often do a lot of tasking, and the purpose of a really good task is to bring unconscious elements conscious, and the observation of behavior. Observation of behavior causes behavior to change. There's lots of studies around how that works. So if you can have the self-awareness to catch and listen to the self-talk, writing it down, what your self-talk are, or doing a voice recording, doing some way of recording that, that's going to start bringing that awareness from unconscious to conscious. All right. And then once it becomes conscious, you're observing that. And then you can start sort of thinking about, okay, how do I go to being clear on what I want? And therefore it comes back down to saying things the way you want it, and removing the negations from, the language you use. And of course, a very popular one is don't think of a blue tree. All right. You had to think of the blue tree to not think about it. Right. So I don't want to blow this sale. I don't want to lose this job. I don't want to get fired today. I hope my girlfriend doesn't cheat on me today. What are all these things that you're saying? You're going to start saying things the way that you want it and catching yourself. So that's very unconscious when you do that, but when you're aware of it. I think that my favorite one on this is when we do leadership programs, we talk above and below the line, and I catch someone on the word try. And I go, okay, you guys need to do a try jar. All right.
Oh, yes.
And the unconscious language of try, just that word try, well, it doesn't sound like a bad thing. I'll try and do something, but we know that the purpose of that try is that you have no intention of doing it. So when we go and pick one word like try, and everyone's aware of when it's being said, all of a sudden they're catching themselves after they say it. And after a little while, they go, almost said try.
And that is that process of repatterning that neurology, isn't it? You know, like previously completely out of their awareness, then it comes in the awareness. And I often use the example for myself when I'm teaching this around when I first learned around the process that the mind doesn't process negatives, right? And I remember learning about that in my practitioner training and transformational language and saying things the way you want it. And I used to always say what I didn't want, and it was completely unconscious. So I'd be walking out of the house and I'd go, don't forget the keys. And lo and behold, keys were inside, I was outside. And so, then you do the, oh my God, how could I be so stupid? I was telling myself that not to forget the keys. And so in that process, and this was the 4 stages to learning, I had no awareness of it, got awareness, but I was incompetent. So I'd still say things like, don't forget the keys. Then I got to a point where I'd catch myself and I might be halfway through saying, don't forget the keys. And then I go, hang on, remember the keys. And then to a point where now I just say things that I want the way that I want them because it's so conditioned. And I remember a couple of months ago, I was chatting with a really lovely client of ours who's in Western Australia. And she said, Shondell, I just want your words. Like you always say things so perfectly. And I want to learn how you say things so perfectly. And really what she was talking about was the fact that the direction and focus of our language is actually part of that habit formation and getting more things that we want the way that we want them, right?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it starts with the ownership of wanting to do it. It's so out of your awareness. And I think a good way of doing it is thinking about when you're articulating instructions to someone, whether it be your kids or your dog. That cats generally don't listen to people, but in that scenario, it's saying it the way you want it. All right. So stay on the footpath. Don't walk as opposed to don't run. I need this report done by this time. Getting clear on actually saying it in the intention the way you want it is a great place to start. And then listening to yourself when you talk to yourself on that and becoming consciously of it. And then obviously that at a point where it becomes that. And I've had that conversation. People go, how did you just say that thing? I'm like, I don't know. It's been 25 years of awareness. And funnily enough, after having a break from time to time, you tend to sort of want to switch it off. And then you come back into the world and all of a sudden you go, hang on a minute, I've dropped the ball on this. And there's been situations where Oh man, I mean, a few years back, I got a point where I was burnt out, had enough, just wanted to take some time off and not do anything, and and it was interesting how that process of switching off, I switched off the brain of actually being active on what I wanted, and I created this thing I didn't want, and at the end of it, I had no idea I had done it until I was back on teaching the process. You've got to focus on your what. You say, and they're going, hang on a minute. Ah, I did it. I
Isn't that
created that
interesting?
thing I didn't want.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I
So
do
it's
remember that
for it to
conversation
happen.
with you all those years ago, Brad. I was there for that. And I
Yeah.
remember us having a very important conversation about that. And I think part of the habit formation is creating environments where you're forced to do that. One of the things that I will, be very vulnerable for our audience and say that, just because we have these tools doesn't necessarily mean that, everything's great all the time. So there are days where you might be feeling a little less motivated or a little less inspired, or perhaps maybe there's some stuff going on and you feel like, oh gosh, now I've got this full day in front of me. And I'm so grateful for having coaching sessions and places where I have to be in, hold the space for our clients, because it forces me to be in that space. And so I might have started the day with perhaps maybe I'm not necessarily where I need to be, get into state for the client, and you get that great result for yourself as well. So, very important in the context of circle of influence too, right?
Yeah, I think that state, that's influence, that's getting to that state's a big part of it, is right. And because, if we turn up to a coaching session and, oh, how are you going? Yeah, it's been a tough day and had no milk for my breakfast and the coffee was off and
Don't laugh. We've seen some people in trainings who show up that way for their practice coaching sessions,
yeah.
but we won't go there right now.
Yeah. And again, you're forced to be into that state control because that's what we're in. But I think if you map that across into other areas, we've seen leaders who walk into the office dragging their feet because it's been a tough day, and all of a sudden the whole team are just wop 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 wop. It's straight away, as opposed to how do I open this door and walk in there and actually get into the state, act as if I'm the leader I need to be, act as if I'm the successful person I need to be, so that I'm actually putting that out there. And, there is a level of point where you may feel that that's fake or incongruent, but it's a state that you can put yourself in for the purpose of conditioning yourself. And over a period of time, it becomes an automatic state to be in. You don't see highly successful professional people publicly in any kind of negative state. They're generally pretty on point and pretty clear with the message that they're getting through and what they're doing to be that successful, because the belief in themselves has to come first for them to have the belief in others and the belief in their product and service.
I want to flip the switch on this for a second, because we often find ourselves talking about habit formation with the assumption that perhaps maybe there are some people that haven't got the habits that they need and that they need to find out what they are and form them. But I also want to talk about the unconscious mind. And what's coming to mind for me is that there are some very successful people that do certain habits that are completely unconscious to them that actually get them a great result. That if they were able to bring conscious awareness to something that they do that gives them results and success, then they could, with volition, do that more intentionally. And I think these are the small habits that potentially, like C-suite, executives and people who are very senior have learnt how to do, that maybe they don't understand the keys to their success in these small habits, which then makes it very difficult for them to model that and then teach it to others. So do you want to talk a little bit more about perhaps maybe bringing the unconscious conscious for people who have great habits, but they don't know what they are that are getting them the results?
Yeah, I think it brings to mind a particular leader we're working with who had taken a particular department in a particular state in an operation scenario and really made it sing. Like, he did a really good job of going through and doing that. And to the point where it was now ready for him to actually let go of the reins. And it was difficult for him to do that because he'd done such a great job and he was so clear on what he was doing. But he now had to train other people up to do it. And in that process, I said, all right, so teach me how to do one thing and that you do. What's that one thing that you do that's really, really good in the skill set that you don't do anymore, that you did before, that you can't seem to let go of? And it was interesting going through and doing that. And for him to actually unpack and think about, okay, what it was phenomenal, because all of a sudden it brought to his awareness the actual order and sequence of what he thinks about. And there's a whole range of things that weren't important in that. This is the basis of modeling and NLP, right? But a whole bunch of things that weren't important. But he got very clear on some very fundamental things that he did in doing that. And up until that point, he'd really, really struggled in being able to work out how to tell someone what the definition of good was, or he would show them how to do it, but they would just sort of see it, then they'd be making up their own internal process of how to do it, not necessarily learning what actually worked. And subsequently, he's done that a number of times in different areas. And funnily enough, quite often on a coaching call, I will then say to him, okay, so what have you unpacked lately from your skill? He goes, oh, of course, I haven't done that for a while. So my accountability of his coaching is reminding him to become his own consciousness of forgetting, become conscious about watching what he's doing to be able to train other people how to do the things he does, which is excellent. So it's interesting how that accountability and that coaching helps people become that awareness of consciousness. I think this is probably the fundamentals of coaching, where so much of accountability coaching is about making sure that that person is still consciously aware of the behaviors they're doing, to unpack the brilliance and leave behind things that aren't so good.
Yeah, this brings to mind for me the concept of the blind spot, and maybe some of our listeners have seen the Johari window before, but for those who haven't, seen or heard of that, it's basically around the fact that there are kind of 4 different quadrants that we can play in with our behaviors, and one of the areas or the quadrants is the blind spot. And one of my favorite quotes, which came from a mentor of mine a number of years ago, is that in golf you can't see your own swing. And this was very apt for me, because I went and had a session with a golf coach, and they had a video camera and had a look at my golf swing. And I don't know how I'd managed to create so many like overcorrections and things like that. And in the space of a couple of minutes of him just pointing those things out, making them conscious, giving me a focal point of what to do and what to think about while I was doing my golf swing, it was a totally transformed golf swing. These transformations, albeit quite quickly, would never have happened had somebody not pointed out them to me. That was completely in my blind spot, a lack of awareness. And so I think what you said there around the importance of having an unreasonable friend or having a coach is just such an important part of the accelerated progression, which is, a lot of the things that we do in our leadership program, and why we're able to create such transformational results in environments so quickly, is that process of the multi-tiered approach, but also, bringing unconscious and bringing conscious certain behaviors for leaders.
Yeah, and knowing what those behaviors need to be, like just the concept of email, the technology of email and the transition from slow mail to fax to email was incredibly quick, and it happened faster than people actually had a behavior or a strategy to be able to deal with it. And just that concept itself is, how do I deal with my inbox, and not having a way of being able to know what to do, how to manage it, no strategy, no process. And all of a sudden your working day is being ruled by your inbox, and you wonder why you're not effective. That was a conversation having with someone where just a strategy, and then becoming aware of how they're using their email. And it's a very simple one thing that we all have to deal with is our inbox. A lot of people like to outsource their inbox. There's nothing wrong with that, because certainly it makes more sense if someone go off and delete all the spam and not get caught up in shopping and phishing emails than you.
Especially if you've got a habit of saving money that you're looking to build as well, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So these little behaviors that you wouldn't know all come from the concept of modeling and finding out what is the best strategy for email that works for the majority of people. If you found that out and you knew that at the same time as you open up your first email, and created your first email folder, would be a different scenario. Your calendar, your communication, how you run up and start a meeting, how you make sure there's an agenda. There's so many things that people are not aware of. And then if they've got the strategy and they can see what they're doing currently and what they can be doing, because they have what can actually work based on experience with what people are working with, we can sort of overcome the barriers that prevent them from doing that. And because they become aware of that behavior in that time, we see a real shift in their effective of productivity, their time management, their resilience, and their ability to deal with difficult conversations, their ability to improve productivity within team, and also, funnily enough, staff retention. Just because they're better at doing the things that are important in that scenario, and not being caught up in all the unconscious stuff, and not having a strategy or a behavior, and not being aware of what it takes to get there to do that. And it's not difficult. It's really not hard when you know, right? It's like the jigsaw puzzle. I think that sums it up. When a while back we were working with a client, and he says, "I think I've worked out why you guys call it." And he said, I got it. He said, "What's like?" He says, "You know when you get like a 1,000-piece puzzle and you put the thing on the table and there's pieces all over the place and you're trying to work out where to go, right? That sort of stuff, and you got no idea how to put it together." He says, "You guys kind of get the box with the lid with a picture on it, sit in front of it. So we go, okay, that's what we want." So that's what you do at Life Puzzle. You create the picture of where we want to go so we can put the pieces together to get there. And I thought that was a really good, thank you. That person who gave us that, James, who gave us that moment. It was a really clarity on, okay, that really sums up what we're doing for someone who every session we had was like an epiphany, a light bulb moment that went off. It was so much fun going through and doing coaching with him, because he just ate everything alive, because he was in a different industry that he had experienced in, and he was growing and new to that particular industry, and ate everything alive because he just wanted to know the strategy how to do that. So he was open to it and willing to go for it. So I think those kind of opportunities where you know there's a way of doing it, but you don't know how to do it, so you make it up and you learn, and you reinvent the wheel, so to speak, as opposed to finding out how to get there and then being aware of those behaviors that get the blockage of being able to do that, and having a strategy. You just get there so much faster, and that's what is that productive. That's what is that excellence, in knowing what is a behavior that's excellence and how do I do it well.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that we talked about before was the concept of transformational language and saying things the way that you want them. And, you know, I think in that experience, as you were talking about that, that person really wanted it. They ate up everything because they really wanted it. And they were really clear on the fact that they didn't have it yet. So they knew they were here. They knew they wanted to be there. And then it was a process of really wanting to bridge that gap. And one of the super interesting things for me on this is just about how our language affects that. You know, when we speak words, they're usually describing the pictures that we have in our mind. And Tony Robbins talks about you get to do something as opposed to you have to do something. Now, if we bring this back into the mechanics of NLP, we're talking about modal operators of possibility and necessity, which are ways that we describe words around how we look at something that's coming up. And so, for example, like, not to get too technically jargonistic for our audience, but if we've got something coming up, we're either going to say, I have to do that, or I get to do that, right? And so the process of saying I have to do it has this necessity associated with it, whereas, I can do that has this possibility associated with it. That really changes how we feel in our minds, right?
Yeah, I choose to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm
Speaking of,
making a choice to do this. I'm choosing to have a sick day today, or I'm choosing to turn up work even though I don't really feel like going to work today.
and believe it or not, sometimes just admitting that process can actually have you show up better than if you're trying to convince yourself of something else. Like, I remember years ago, I worked with a lady who was an alcoholic, and there was certain reasons why she was choosing alcohol as her escape mechanism. We know that with all addictions, generally there's a reason why the person does outside of the addiction, the actual behavior. It's usually to get a payoff in some way that isn't necessarily always about the substance. And so this lady was an alcoholic, and there was a very specific reason that she was drinking, because she was trying to shut out some things. And when she came to the realization that that was why she had chosen that behavior, we talked about the possibility of her changing her life scenario to actually change that circumstance. And she said, I'm just not prepared to do that, and I don't want to do it. And I said, okay, so now what we need to do is we need to own the fact that you're using this as a coping mechanism to be somewhere that you don't want to be, or to stay in a situation that you are choosing to stay in. And so it was really important, the process of owning the fact that she was choosing that behavior with the consequences of it, as opposed to saying, oh, I'm an alcoholic, but I can't give up. Or
Yeah.
I don't want to give, or like the whole process of ownership was really important.
Yeah, and it comes back down to that
Speaking of
concept
all
of
of that,
cause and effect. That basic concept of cause and effect, right? But it's you saying I choose to do it as opposed to I have to do it. I have to do it because there's some kind of external force making me do it, as opposed to I choose to do it, or I am doing this because you have ownership on it.
100%. And I think that there's a really important lesson here, because I know that perhaps maybe some people might watch that and say, oh, well, like it's an incongruent behavior, or you should have helped further to let go of that behavior. That there might be some people who have had some really bad experiences in that area. But I think what's really important is that we all have free will and we all have a story, and so rather than looking at judgment, look at potentially, what's relevant about that for you in terms of why it might be coming up. And this is where I want to talk about sabotage, right? So when we think about habits and we think about the ability to actually create amazing success in our habits and building systems to win and, having a playbook of excellence, I think that there are a number of different things that people do that sabotage their success before they even start. And we'll just throw out a few, Brad. I'm going to start with one, and I'm going to say that, like, simple practices like actually scheduling in your calendar, like habit stacking is something that I learned from, not only my training, but also reiterated by Atomic Habits with James Clear. We love your book, James Clear. Just a little shout out to you. We talk about you all the time. But one of the things that I loved about stacking habits is the fact that you're actually looking for ways that you can form new habits or form great behaviors by stacking them on some that have already been hardwired. And I think that this is important in the context of time management, which is that, and it only happened this morning, you witnessed it, Brad, where someone had scheduled in my diary to do something that was like a completely different type of brain space activity that I needed between two things that were similar. And I appreciate the need to get something done because there was a gap there. But I know that I won't be on my best performance for that thing that was in the middle, based on the fact that it takes a lot of energy to switch between those tasks. So that for me, that's an example of sabotage that I see all the time in others, where they're not thinking about what they need to do with the whole. You talked about it earlier. What about you? What are some of your favorite stories or insights around sabotage?
Yeah, I think it's when you often people will take on too much. They'll say yes without actually realizing the consequence of that. So they'll go through, and we've seen this before, where people will say, "Will you do that?" "Yes, I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll do it." "Have you done it yet?" "No, I haven't done it yet." "When are you going to do it?" "I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll do it." So I think there's that sabotage of often saying yes to things you probably shouldn't be saying to is a factor. And also, I think the other one that's really big is when it comes back down to you're starting your day off and what you can do to have that rhythm. We know that we talk to people who go, "Oh, I haven't been to the gym the last 6 days and I'm really sort of feeling it." And I go, "Okay, what's happened here?" "Oh, this it was busy, blah blah blah." And I go, "All right, so yeah, how more productive would you think you would have been if you had started that routine by going to the gym and doing that morning thing?" And they're going, "Yep, okay. Next session, I come back, been in the gym every day, 6 days, chalk and cheese, feeling so much better," right? So it's very easy to sort of get out of that rhythm and do something that you shouldn't do for yourself. It doesn't set yourself up for success for the day, for the week, for the month. So I think that's a big factor. And I think the final thing when it comes to sabotage is beating yourself up when you've done it, because it kind of just reinforces the itty bitty shitty committee. It kind of reinforces those things. So just admit it. You've done it. Just own it. Learn from that and go, "Okay, yep, I've sabotaged myself. I've done the wrong thing here. What can I do?" Rather than beat myself up about it, what can I do just to turn things around and sort of go through that? Maybe I shouldn't have bought the double packet of Tim Tams, which is one packet of one would have been fine.
That was one of my favorites. I think it's also not thinking about the day ahead. So another example for me on sabotage is that you're not thinking ahead enough in terms of the consequences of the choice right now. And I shared an example in one of our meetings recently that I'd finished a very long day delivering a training on an international time zone. It was about 11:30 at night, and I looked and I went, "I'm too wired up right now to go to bed. I think I'm going to go and watch the next episode of Yellowstone." Not thinking about the fact that the next day I would feel absolutely rubbish about that. And so, from that perspective, I think sometimes people, they will let their urges or their instant gratification actually affect the commitments that they've got moving forward. And, that not thinking a day ahead, a week ahead, a month ahead, depending on what's the right rhythm for you, I think is also a really important one.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed that and really got some insight into what you can do to build your habits consciously, unconsciously. That sabotage, that process of being able to go through and see what you're doing, what you can change, being aware of it, and making sure that you are getting the most out of yourself in the moment and for the future. Next month, we're going to be talking about language and communication, both personally, professionally, how we go through and do all those sort of things. So Shondell, you want to tell us a little bit about what's in store for us next month?
Yeah, look, I think it's going to be a really great conversation around, looking at some of those mechanics around what happens in transformational language, because we talked about that a lot. A lot of people have reached out to us and say, okay, well, I get the importance of this, that it's not just positive dialogue, but how do we start to transform from itty bitty shitty committee language to transformational language and focusing on getting great outcomes, not just from ourselves, but also how do we start to pace and lead in our language and encourage other people to, want to do the things that we want them to come on the journey with us in a way that is congruent. So lots in store in the context of skills development, in the context of mindset, in the context of being able to communicate effectively with anyone in front of you, and of course, leadership keys as per usual. So really looking forward to seeing you there. Thanks so much for today, Brad. And for everyone that's been listening, thanks for being here. And until we meet again, it's Shondell and Brad from Life Puzzle. Be well and be empowered. Bye for now.
For now.